The familiar scent of my aunt's signature pot roast filled the dining room of the Morrison family estate. Every month, like clockwork, the entire extended family gathered here for dinner, a tradition that felt more like torture than togetherness. I adjusted my simple black dress, feeling distinctly out of place among the designer labels and flashy jewelry that adorned my relatives. "Sophie, you actually came." My cousin Elizabeth's voice dripped with fake enthusiasm as she air-kissed my cheeks. Her Cartier bracelet clinked against her wine glass, a not-so-subtle reminder of her success. I forced a polite smile. "Wouldn't miss it, Liz." The Morrison family dinners had become a monthly showcase of achievements, promotions and acquisitions. A parade of success where everyone competed to prove they were living up to the family name. Everyone except me, apparently. "Still working at that little financial firm?" Uncle James called out from across the room, not bothering to look up from his phone. He was the patriarch now after my grandfather passed away 5 years ago. The family real estate empire, Morrison Properties, had tripled under his leadership, a fact he never failed to mention. "Actually, I started my own consulting company," I said, taking a seat at the massive oak dining table. Elizabeth laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Oh right, your private practice. How's that going? Making ends meet?" Before I could respond, my cousin Michael chimed in. "Hey, at least she's trying. Not everyone can be as successful as the rest of us." The rest of the family chuckled. I took a long sip of water, letting the condensation from the glass cool my burning cheeks. They only knew. 8 years ago, I'd walked away from a prestigious position at Morrison Properties. Uncle James had offered me a safe career path, start in middle management, follow orders, and maybe in 20 years, I'd have a shot at a director position. The same path my cousins had happily accepted. "You're making a huge mistake," Uncle James had warned when I resigned. "Nobody leaves Morrison Properties. This family built an empire by sticking together." But I'd seen how they built that empire. Aggressive acquisitions, predatory lending practices, forcing small businesses out of their properties. The Morrison way of doing business left a trail of destroyed lives behind its impressive profit margins. So I left. Started from scratch. Spent years building something different. "Sophie's just different," my mother explained apologetically to anyone who asked. She'd never forgiven me for walking away from the family business. In her eyes, I'd chosen failure over loyalty. Aunt Patricia emerged from the kitchen, carrying her famous pot roast. "Everyone take your seats. Dinner's ready." I found myself wedged between Elizabeth and her husband Brad, a corporate lawyer who loved talking about his latest luxury car purchases. Across from me, Michael and his wife Diana showcased matching Rolex watches, wedding gifts from Uncle James. "So," Elizabeth turned to me as the food was served, "tell us about this consulting business of yours. Any big clients we might know?" The table went quiet, all eyes turning to me. This was their favorite part of family dinner, the moment they could remind me of my supposed failures. "I do all right," I said simply, cutting into my pot roast. "Still a nobody after 8 years?" Michael laughed. "Meanwhile, I just closed the Henderson deal. 40 million in pure profit." "The Henderson property?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "The historic apartment complex downtown?" "Not anymore," Michael grinned. "We're demolishing it next month. Luxury condos are the future. Those old tenants were paying way below market value anyway. 300 families live there," I said quietly. Uncle James waved his hand dismissively. "Business is business, Sophie. This is why you'll never succeed. You're too soft. Too concerned about strangers instead of family." Speaking of family, Elizabeth interjected, "Did you hear about our latest acquisition? That new development in the Bay Area? Daddy's planning to double the rent as soon as the papers are signed." My phone buzzed quietly in my lap. A text from Sarah, my assistant. "Urgent. Morrison Properties loan application ready for review. Their primary lender backed out. They need approval by tomorrow or the Bay Area deal falls through." I suppressed a smile, remembering the meetings I'd had last week with their former lender. Amazing how quickly things could change when certain facts came to light. "Still driving that old Honda, Sophie?" Brad asked, smirking. I just got the new Mercedes AMG. I could talk to my dealer if you need financing help." More laughter around the table. Even my mother joined in, though she had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Actually, I started, but Elizabeth cut me off. Oh darling, don't be embarrassed. We can't all be successful. Someone has to be the cautionary tale, right? My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. The table fell silent as my ringtone cut through their laughter. Sorry, I should take this, I said, standing up. It's about a loan approval. Elizabeth rolled her eyes. What, for your Honda payments? I answered the phone, putting it on speaker. Yes, Sarah. Ms. Blackwood, sorry to interrupt your dinner, but we need your decision on the Morrison Properties loan application. It's for the Bay Area acquisition, $50 million total. Their financial statements show some concerning patterns, and given their history of predatory practices. The color drained from Uncle James's face. Elizabeth's fork clattered against her plate. Did you say Blackwood? Michael stammered. As in, Blackwood Financial Group. I smiled, finally letting my carefully maintained mask slip. Yes, cousin. As in the largest private lending firm on the West Coast. The one that just bought out your primary lender. The one that now holds the majority of Morrison Properties debt. The silence that fell over the dining room was deafening. That's impossible, Uncle James whispered. Blackwood is run by S.J. Blackwood. I've been trying to get a meeting with them for months. S.A. Blackwood, I said quietly. Sophie Jane Blackwood. The nobody you've been mocking for 8 years. Elizabeth's perfect makeup couldn't hide her shock. Michael looked like he might faint. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. About finally having the power to change how the Morrison family did business. Sarah, I spoke into the phone, my voice clear and confident. Hold the loan approval for now. I think it's time I had a proper meeting with Morrison Properties Management. After all, family should stick together, right? I ended the call and looked around the table at my stunned relatives. 8 years of dismissal, mockery, and condescension had led to this moment. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The real shock would come tomorrow, when they learned exactly what kind of changes their precious empire was about to undergo. Sometimes success isn't about making the most money or closing the biggest deals. Sometimes it's about building something meaningful, something that can force change even in the most resistant places. And sometimes, justice comes served with a side of pot roast. The Morrison Properties headquarters looked different from the outside. 8 years ago I'd walked out of these glass doors, vowing never to return. Now I stood in the marble lobby as owner of the company that held their fate in its hands. Miss Blackwood, the receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile. News travels fast in the business world, and yesterday's family dinner revelation had already made the rounds. Mr. Morrison and the board are waiting for you. I straightened my blazer and headed for the elevator, Sarah walking beside me with an iPad full of documents that would change everything. Their financial records are worse than we thought, Sarah murmured as we ascended. They've been hiding losses, manipulating tenant contracts, and there's evidence of systematic harassment of low-income residents. Just like old times, I replied, remembering why I'd left in the first place. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a very different scene from our monthly family dinners. Uncle James sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Elizabeth and Michael flanked him, both looking like they hadn't slept. Various board members filled the remaining seats, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Sophie, Uncle James stood, forcing a smile. Or should I say Ms. Blackwood? Quite a surprise you gave us last night. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said, taking a seat. We're here to discuss the future of Morrison Properties. Now see here, Michael started, but I cut him off. No, you see here, cousin. Your company is in trouble. Deep trouble. Your primary lender didn't just randomly decide to sell your debt to Blackwood Financial. They sold because we showed them evidence of your predatory practices, your hidden losses, and your systematic violation of housing laws. Elizabeth's perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. You've been spying on us? I've been watching, I corrected. Watching as you forced families out of their homes. Watching as you violated housing codes and safety regulations. Watching as you built this empire on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. That's business, Uncle James snapped. The Morrison way of doing business. Not anymore. I nodded to Sarah, who distributed folders to everyone present. Inside you'll find 2 documents. The first is a complete audit of Morrison Properties' illegal practices. If this reaches the housing authority, you'll face criminal charges. The room erupted in nervous whispers as the board members flipped through the damning evidence. The second document, I continued, is a restructuring proposal. Blackwood Financial is prepared to refinance your entire debt portfolio, but with conditions. Uncle James's face reddened. Conditions? We don't need your charity, Sophie. We can find other lenders. Can you? I smiled. Your company's real financial state is about to become very public. Those luxury developments you're so proud of? Built with substandard materials to cut costs. Those voluntary relocations? Actually forced evictions of protected tenants. No lender will touch you once this comes out. You wouldn't, Elizabeth whispered. We're family. Family. I laughed. Was it family when you mocked my career choices? When you dismissed my concerns about ethical business practices? When you celebrated throwing people out of their homes? I stood up, walking to the front of the room. But this isn't about revenge. It's about change. Real change. What do you want? Uncle James asked, his voice heavy with defeat. Morrison Properties will establish a tenant protection program. All current residents will be offered fair long-term leases. The Henderson complex? It stays as affordable housing, fully renovated to meet safety codes. That's ridiculous. Michael exploded. We'll lose millions. You'll lose everything if you don't agree, I replied calmly. But if you do, Blackwood Financial will provide favorable refinancing terms. We'll even partner on new developments, ethical ones that benefit communities instead of destroying them. A board member spoke up. Mr. Morrison, we should consider this. The company's reputation. This is blackmail, Elizabeth hissed. No, cousin. This is consequence. I turned to the board members. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose carefully. As I turned to leave, Uncle James called out. Why are you doing this, Sophie? Really? I paused at the door. 8 years ago I left because I couldn't change this company from the inside. Now I can force that change from the outside. The question is, will you change with it or go down fighting? The next 24 hours transformed Morrison Properties. The board voted overwhelmingly to accept my terms, overriding Uncle James's objections. Elizabeth resigned, unable to accept the new direction. Michael, surprisingly, asked to head the new tenant protection program. I have kids now, he admitted during a private meeting. I don't want them growing up thinking success means hurting people. The Henderson complex residents received new fair-rate leases. The Bay Area development was redesigned to include affordable housing units. Morrison Properties stock actually rose when we announced the ethical restructuring. Turns out, doing good can be good business. My mother called a week later. I never understood why you left, she said quietly. I thought you were running away from success. But you were running toward something better, weren't you? I was running toward the right kind of success, I replied. The next family dinner was different. No more competitive boasting or subtle jabs. Uncle James was quieter, more thoughtful. The cousins who remained at the company spoke about community impact instead of profit margins. As I sat there eating Aunt Patricia's pot roast, I realized that sometimes the biggest victories aren't about proving people wrong, they're about showing them a better way to be right. Sarah texted me during dessert. Henderson complex renovations started today. The tenants sent thank you cards. I smiled, looking around at my family. They weren't perfect, but they were changing. Sometimes that's the best revenge. Not destroying what hurt you but transforming it into something better. Still thinking about your little Honda? Brad asked, trying to recapture some of his old arrogance. Actually, I replied, I'm thinking about the new community center we're building in the Henderson complex. Would anyone like to help plan the opening ceremony? To my surprise, hands went up around the table. Change, when it finally comes, can be contagious. 1 year later, I stood on a podium outside the renovated Henderson complex. Beside me, Uncle James prepared to cut the ribbon on the new community center. The residents who'd once feared Morrison Properties now filled the crowd, cheering. I was wrong about you, Sophie, Uncle James said quietly. About everything. It's not about being wrong or right, I replied. It's about doing better when you know better. The ribbon fell away and with it the last remnants of the old Morrison way of doing business. Sometimes success isn't measured in dollars or deals. Sometimes it's measured in lives changed, communities saved, and families transformed. As I watched children rush into the new playground, I thought about that family dinner a year ago. They'd mocked my failed career, never knowing I was building something more valuable than money, a way to force change in a system that desperately needed it. My phone buzzed. Another development company needed refinancing. Another opportunity to spread positive change. Ready to do some good? I asked Sarah. She smiled. Always, Ms. Blackwood. Always.
The smell of lemon cleaner clung to the air as I carried the bakery box through my parents' front door. Mom was in the kitchen, fussing with a thrift store cake stand, while the roasted chicken filled the split-level house with its heavy warmth. Aunt Margot was already moving vases around the dining table, nudging lilies an inch this way and that, as though flowers could raise our family's standing. I placed the carrot cake on the counter and slipped into my usual role, reliable, invisible. Celeste swept in 10 minutes late, hair done, voice carrying, announcing she'd just had coffee with a buyer from Shorewood Hills. She had no gift bag, no dessert, no card, only her story. Everyone leaned in as if she had brought gold. Dinner moved along the familiar grooves, Dad pouring himself another glass, Mom smoothing napkins, Aunt Margot nodding like an audience member. I was cutting the cake when Dad looked at me, chuckled, and said it, "You'll never be as good as your sister." The room broke into laughter, easy and unthinking. Celeste grinned wider. Mom chuckled too, like it was harmless. I kept my face steady while my chest tightened. My hands moved automatically, sliding cake onto plates. But inside, I was burning. The words clung to me heavier than the smell of lemon cleaner. No one noticed the silence settling over me. They were too busy following Celeste's next story about a downtown condo listing. When the evening ended, I gathered my jacket without comment. By the time I pulled into my apartment's cracked driveway, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom lit the screen. "Next time, bring paper towels. We're out." I set the phone down, the glow still sharp in my eyes, and thought of everything I had never said. Back in my apartment, the text about paper towels wouldn't leave me alone. It tugged at a thread that unraveled years of habits, each one tied to money quietly leaving my account. I remembered the first time Dad called during a heavy snowstorm. The power bill was higher than expected. Could I spot them $120 until Friday I was 21, earning just enough at the university office to cover rent on my studio? I sent the money without hesitation. Friday never came, but February did. And so did another request gas money this time. By March, it was groceries. Mom's voice had carried that strained mix of apology and expectation. So I told myself I was doing what a good daughter should. The pattern settled in. Every first week of the month, I transferred $300 for utilities. On Wednesdays, another $40 or $60 for groceries. By my mid-20s, it was routine like brushing my teeth or checking my email. I drove to Woodman's more times than I can count, dropping off bags of produce and pantry staples while Celeste posted selfies at the Memorial Union Terrace. I bought a thermostat from the Home Depot on Stoughton Road, installed it myself because Dad's back was acting up again. When the water heater gave out, my card covered the plumber's deposit. Through it all, I told myself love looked like reliability. That being dependable was my identity, even if no one thanked me. Celeste remained the star, the golden child with the dazzling smile. I was the background hum, steady but forgettable. One night, scrolling through my banking app, I began saving screenshots of each transfer. At first it was accidental, then it became deliberate, folder by folder, month by month. I collected proof of a life lived in quiet transactions. The folder grew until it felt heavier than my silence, and I knew sooner or later it would demand to be opened. Celeste knew how to fill a room, even if it was just with her phone camera. She staged open houses on Monroe Street with bowls of bright lemons on spotless counters, then posted reels of herself laughing on porches she didn't own. On warm evenings, she posed at the Memorial Union Terrace, a plastic cup of beer raised high, the lake stretching out behind her. Each post gathered likes that seemed to confirm everything our parents already believed. At family gatherings, her stories became the centerpiece. Mom told anyone who would listen that Celeste was on her way to becoming the top realtor in Dane County. Dad bragged about her networking skills, how she knew the right people. When bills came up in conversation, they rewrote the past so seamlessly it almost sounded true. Thanksgiving, when the water heater had failed. Mom smiled at Aunt Margot and said, "Celeste made the calls that saved us." I sat there remembering the plumber's deposit charged to my card, the receipt still in my folder. Meanwhile, my own life shrank to make space for theirs. I skipped dinners with coworkers because I had sent another transfer that afternoon. I pushed off a dentist appointment for 2 years, always telling myself I'd reschedule when things were less tight. Even the chair at my kitchen table wobbled every time I sat down. A Craigslist find I never replaced because there was always something more urgent for them. Then came the moment that stung most. Aunt Margot, rearranging flowers like always, leaned across the table during one of Celeste's stories and said, "She's the reliable one, isn't she?" Mom nodded, Dad chuckled, and Celeste grinned. The word reliable was meant for me, the daughter who kept their lights on and their fridge filled. But in that instant, I realized my role had been stolen and repainted in brighter colors, and I had stayed too quiet for too long. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the folder of screenshots and felt the weight pressing harder, as if it were daring me to count. Sleep had become a stranger to me. The more I tried to shut my eyes, the more the words from that dinner replayed in my head. I finally gave up, reached for my phone, and opened the banking app. The glow lit up my small apartment, the only sound the hum of the old radiator. I started scrolling. The transfers stretched back further than I wanted to admit utilities, groceries, gas, car repairs, the endless list of just this once. Each line carried a date, an amount, and a note that I had typed without thinking: groceries, utilities, help. At first I skimmed, but soon I was reading each one as though they were entries in a diary I had forgotten I was writing. I told myself I would stop after a few months, but my thumb kept moving. Years passed on the screen in minutes. By the time I reached the beginning, the total in my head had grown into something I couldn't ignore. I scribbled numbers on a pad by my couch, my pen pressing deeper with every sum. When I finally stopped, the figure stared back at me, nearly $29,000. The number hit me harder than any insult ever had. It wasn't just money. It was the trips I hadn't taken, the savings I never built, the dentist appointments I skipped, the weekends I stayed home while Celeste posted photos from another lakeside restaurant. I sat there, pen trembling, wondering how I had let silence cost me so much. The next morning, I walked to the university library and printed page after page of bank statements. I bought a cheap green binder from the dollar store on East Johnson and spent the evening hole punching and filing each sheet. On the cover, I wrote a single word: household. As I slid the final page inside, the binder felt heavier than paper should. It was no longer just proof. It was a record of my silence. And I knew the day would come when silence would not be enough. The following Sunday, I drove back to the house on the east side, the green binder tucked under the passenger seat like a secret. I had told myself I wouldn't need it, that maybe this dinner would pass without commentary, without comparison, but I brought it anyway. Inside, the same lemon cleaner hung in the air. The table was set, the chicken roasting, Aunt Margot circling the lilies. Celeste breezed in 20 minutes late, heels clicking, carrying a glossy bag. She pulled out a candle wrapped in gold tissue and set it in front of Mom with a flourish. Mom clasped her hands like she'd been handed an heirloom. I stood there with the bakery cake in my arms, suddenly invisible. We ate. Celeste filled the room with chatter about an upcoming open house and a client from Shorewood Hills. Dad laughed along, leaning back in his chair, glass of wine in hand. I waited for the moment, though I already felt it circling. It came after dessert. the plates still warm with crumbs of carrot cake. Dad looked at me, chuckled as if repeating a harmless joke, and said it again. "You'll never be as good as your sister." Aunt Margot let out a small laugh, shaking her head, and added, "Celeste is the one we can always rely on." The words landed heavier this time. My chest burned, my hands tightened around the fork. I thought of the binder in the car, the nearly $29,000 written across my silence, and something inside me snapped. I set the fork down and looked straight at Dad. "Then tell her to pay all the bills," I said, steady and clear, "because I am not sending money anymore." The room went still. Mom gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "What, are you crazy?" Celeste blinked, then smirked like she'd been given another line to star in. Dad frowned, the chuckle gone, but he didn't speak. Aunt Margot shifted uncomfortably with the flowers she had been fussing over all evening. No one moved. The silence stretched. And for once, I didn't rush to fill it. I let it sit there, heavy as the binder waiting in my car, knowing the next moment would demand more than quiet. The next Sunday, the invitation arrived in the family group text. The words chipper and bright, "Dinner at 6. "We'll talk about a plan." I knew what kind of plan it would be. Still. I drove across town. The binder this time not hidden under the seat but resting openly on the passenger side, its weight steady against every turn. When I walked in, the dining table was already laid out differently. The chicken sat carved on a platter, but next to it was a calculator, a neat stack of envelopes, and a pad of paper covered in numbers. Mom straightened in her chair. Dad looked serious in a way he usually reserved for traffic tickets, and Celeste lounged against the counter scrolling her phone. "We've been thinking," Dad began, "with the way prices are climbing, interest rates, inflation. It makes sense for everyone to contribute regularly. A family contribution plan." He tapped the calculator with his finger as if the numbers on the page were inevitable. "Everyone," Mom echoed. "It's only fair." She gestured toward Celeste, who didn't even look up. I sat down slowly, slid the tote from my shoulder, and placed the green binder on the table. "Before we talk about new plans," I said, "we need to talk about the last 4 years." Mom blinked. "What's that, receipts?" I answered. I opened the binder, the pages fanning out, filled with dates, amounts, and notes. Every transfer, every payment, utilities, groceries, repairs. I might have missed a few. The room shifted, Dad's jaw tightened. This is not the time to play accountant. Mom flipped through a few sheets, frowning. "These were gifts, Tamsin. You wanted to help." "We never asked for any of this." Celeste finally looked up, smirk tugging at her mouth. "Wow, you've really been keeping score, haven't you?" I closed the binder gently, sliding it back toward me. My voice was steady, calmer than I expected. "I am your daughter, not your bank. If you need help, you ask, and you accept no for an answer. But the quiet withdrawals are over." Dad leaned forward, the calculator still beneath his hand. "You're being disrespectful." "What's disrespectful?" I said, meeting his eyes, "is rewriting my life while asking for my checkbook." The silence that followed felt sharper than any argument, stretching across the table like another set of numbers no one wanted to admit, and I knew then that silence would no longer be my role. The night after I set the binder on the table, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The family group chat exploded with messages, Dad warning me not to be dramatic, Mom typing long paragraphs about respect and sacrifice, Celeste chiming in with a single laughing emoji. I muted the thread, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen until the glow steadied my breathing. Then, one by one, I began canceling the transfers, utilities, gas, groceries. Each click ended a cycle I'd lived inside for almost a decade. When the prompts asked, "Are you sure I hit yes every time?" The next morning, I set up a new transfer, this one to my own savings account, on the same dates. in the same amounts I used to send them. It felt both petty and necessary, like reclaiming a piece of myself. I shut the laptop and laced up my running shoes. The Yahara River Parkway was quiet, mist rising above the water, geese cutting through the air. My body hadn't moved like this in years. I counted each breath, each step, as if I were tallying something new. By midday, Aunt Margot invited me to coffee with the promise. Not an ambush. Dear, of course, it was. She smiled over her cup, rehearsed lines tumbling out about family unity and bridges not burned. I listened until her words blurred into the clatter of spoons, then told her I was leaving. Accuracy wasn't cruelty, I reminded myself as I walked out. That night, Mom posted on Facebook, "Raising children is hard when they forget where they came from." Friends and neighbors flooded the comments with sympathy. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the co-op on Willie Street, bought berries, salmon, and a brand of yogurt I had always skipped because it felt unnecessary. Relief and grief braided themselves together as I unpacked the bags. I was lighter, but I was also lonelier. Still, when I lay down that night, my body unclenched in a way I hadn't felt in years. Sleep came without calculation, and I knew something had shifted for good. The first cracks showed up online. Celeste posted a photo of her new sneakers with the caption "self-made." The skyline of downtown Madison blurred behind her. I stared at the image for a long time, remembering the months I had covered her rent under the label emergency. Dad texted soon after, "We're a unit. Tamsin. Everyone does their part." Mom followed with a long message suggesting a fresh start. "Let's just agree on a number. Maybe $300 a month. That way there's no confusion." She added a smiley face at the end, as if that softened the request. That same week, a letter arrived at my apartment, addressed to my parents but forwarded to me because my address was still on some old paperwork. A collections notice, $312 past due. I held it in my hands, the familiar pull of habit tugging at me. For a moment, I imagined opening my banking app, covering it before it damaged their credit. Instead, I scanned it, typed a new email, and forwarded it to both of them with the subject line, "This is your bill, not mine." No explanation, no paragraph, just the truth. At the next dinner, Celeste avoided my eyes at first. For a second, I thought she might say anything that admitted she knew the truth of what I had carried. But when Dad raised his glass and Mom talked about family resilience, Celeste leaned back, tossed her hair, and doubled down with a story about closing a deal that didn't sound real. The smirk was back. The moment passed. That night, back in my apartment, I set a new rule: no banking app after 9 at night. Whatever balance waited there could not fix my family at 9:01. I plugged my phone across the room, crawled into bed, and let the silence hold me. The calls kept coming, the spin kept circling, but for the first time I felt like I had stopped orbiting them. Something steadier had begun, and I was learning to live inside it. The first Sunday I didn't drive to their house. I stayed in my apartment and made pancakes. The smell of butter and syrup filled the kitchen, and I let myself linger at the table with a long call to a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. It felt almost rebellious to spend a Sunday morning on myself instead of carrying groceries across town. During the week, I finally scheduled the dentist appointment I had postponed for years. The clinic on Regent Street was nothing fancy, but sitting in the waiting chair, I realized how much I had neglected in the name of being dependable. The bill was mine alone, and I paid it without guilt. The family messages didn't stop. Mom texted updates about Celeste's listings, slipped in comments about how family sticks together. Dad added a line or two about tough times. Celeste sent a photo of herself at a closing, tagged with a champagne glass emoji. The tone had softened, but the narrative hadn't changed. No one thanked me for years of bills. No one admitted what I had carried. They just kept talking as if the silence would rewrite the past. One afternoon, I walked into the Dane County Courthouse, papers in hand, and changed the address on lingering accounts. No more notices would land in my mailbox. No more unpaid reminders disguised as responsibility. Leaving the building, I felt lighter, as though I had finally returned something that never should have been mine. That night, I wrote down a new rule on a scrap of paper and taped it above my desk. Help, if asked clearly and respectfully, will be considered. Otherwise, the answer is no. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. I looked at the green binder on the shelf, closed tight, and understood that the next chapter of my life would not be measured in quiet withdrawals. The sun dipped low over Lake Mendota as I walked the lakeshore path, the water flashing gold where kayaks moved across the surface. The air was cool, steady against my skin, and for the first time in a long time, my steps felt unhurried. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another group text, another update about Celeste's newest win. I glanced at it, typed a neutral reply, and slipped the phone away. No money attached, no hidden strings. Back home. I opened a small box I'd been keeping on my desk. Inside was a brass key I'd found in a drawer, once meant for a lock that no longer existed. I set it in a shadow box and wrote one word across the backing boundaries. I hung it above my desk, not as a decoration but as a reminder of where the line now stood. The green binder stayed in my closet, wedged between old yearbooks and a winter blanket. I didn't need to carry it into every conversation, didn't need to brandish it like a weapon. Its job was done. It held the truth I had doubted for too long, and knowing it was there was enough. Even when messages arrived, Mom sending a photo of the dog, Dad dropping hints about tight months, I no longer felt the old pull to fix it. Their story was still their story. Mine had shifted. I poured a glass of water, sat at my desk beneath the brass key, and let the quiet hold me. For once, silence felt like mine. I will not let anyone turn my love into a bill. The silk of my gown pooled around me, a river of ivory spilling across the carpet. I sat frozen at the vanity, phone buzzing in my hand. My father's words glowed on the screen like they were carved in ice. I can't walk you down the aisle. Silas's event is too important. I'll try for the reception. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The walls of the bridal suite seemed to close in bouquets wilting in their vases, laughter from bridesmaids tapering into silence as they saw my face. I felt the sting before I understood it, like a shard of glass lodged in my chest. He had promised, for months. I had reassured myself he wouldn't let Silas take this from me. I had even offered Solutions car service, schedule adjustments, endless compromises. And still, on the one day meant to be mine, he chose my brother. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, the screen going black but leaving the words etched in my mind. I pressed my palms into my lap, trying to stop the quake in my fingers. Behind me, Jessica whispered to the others, and their reflection hovered uncertainly in the mirror. The image in front of me, the bride with her painted lips and flawless veil, looked like a stranger. Inside, I was still the girl at 17, standing on a stage alone, scanning the crowd for a father who never arrived. The weight of the ring on my finger should have grounded me, but instead it pulled me under. I wanted to scream, but only silence came. Then a knock rattled the door, and the wedding planner's voice called out with brisk efficiency, asking if everything was on schedule. That was the moment I realized nothing about this day would be simple. The planner's voice faded behind the door, but her words left a tremor in the air. My bridesmaids hovered, unsure if they should comfort me or give me space. I leaned forward, elbows on the vanity, and let my eyes fall shut. All I could see was Silas's shadow stretching across my life. 17 years old, the scholarship ceremony that should have been mine to shine in. I had rehearsed my speech for weeks, poured myself into every word of gratitude, but when I stepped onto the stage, whispers had already spread through the auditorium. Didn't her brother say she got special treatment? Something about the judges knowing her advisor? I stood frozen at the podium, cheeks burning. Later, I found out Silas had been the one behind the rumors. When I confronted him, he smirked. "It's not personal. I just didn't want you thinking you were better than me." That night, I begged Dad to finally take my side. Edric listened, his brow creased, but in the end, he sighed. "Silas just feels threatened. Family unity matters more than winning." Those words buried themselves into me deeper than the gossip ever could. My triumph turned into shame, and Silas walked away untouched. And now here I was, years later, sitting in a wedding dress, watching history repeat itself. Silas had dangled another milestone in front of Dad, and Dad had folded again. A part of me wondered if Silas even needed the event tonight, or if it was just another test, another reminder that he held the reins. My chest ached, but beneath the ache, something sharper stirred. Maybe I was done being the one who always absorbed the damage. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the present, and I glanced down to see Uncle Lowell's name flash across the screen. The phone buzzed steadily in my hand, and when I answered, Uncle Lowell's voice came through sharp and raw. "Maribel, I just spoke to your father. He told me he isn't walking you down that aisle." His anger carried like heat through the line, steady and undeniable. After everything he promised, after everything you've given him, he folds to Silas again. It's disgraceful. Tears welled up, but I held the phone tighter, afraid if I let go, I'd collapse completely. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. The edge in his tone softened. "Sweetheart," he said, and I could hear the weight of years in his voice. "Would you allow me the honor? Let me walk you down that aisle. I won't let you stand alone." Something inside me cracked and healed all at once. My throat closed around the words, but I forced them out. "You do that in a heartbeat. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When the call ended, I sat still, letting the sound of his promise settle inside me, around me. My bridesmaids had formed a quiet circle. Jessica knelt beside me, hesitation flickering across her face. "Mari, there's something I should have shown you earlier." She fumbled with her phone, then held it out. On the screen glowed a string of messages from Silas, dated just weeks ago. "Dad's still hesitating, but don't worry. I'll make sure he picks me. He won't be at her wedding if I have anything to do with it." My stomach twisted. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof that this wasn't bad timing or miscommunication. This was sabotage. The words blurred as fresh tears came, but beneath the grief burned something sharper anger, clean and steady. I lifted my gaze to the mirror, my reflection rimmed with mascara-stained eyes but standing straighter than before. "He may have chosen Silas," I said quietly, "but I'm not letting Silas take this day from me." A knock at the door startled us all, and Jessica's head snapped up as the wedding planner called through, asking if we were ready to make decisions. The door opened before I could gather myself, and Clara Fletcher stepped inside, a soft rustle of pale blue fabric following her. She looked elegant and composed, but her eyes immediately fell to my blotched cheeks and trembling hands. Without hesitation, she crossed the room and took both of mine in hers. "Lowell just called me," she said gently. "I know what happened. Maribel, I am so sorry." Her voice carried no pity, only understanding, and that almost undid me more than anything else. "He promised," I whispered. "He promised he'd be here for me." Clara's face tightened, a shadow flickering through her eyes. "When I married Gregory, my father refused to come. Said an interfaith marriage was a disgrace to our family. I waited until the very last moment, still hoping he'd walk through those doors. He never did." I blinked at her, startled. Clara always seemed so certain, so rooted. I had never imagined she carried her own scars. "For years," she continued, her voice steady, "I kept twisting myself in knots, rearranging holidays, softening my expectations. Every time he withheld approval, I tried harder, and all it brought me was more heartbreak." She gave my hands a small squeeze. "You have a choice right now. Maribel, You can keep chasing what your father refuses to give, or you can turn toward the people who are already here, loving you fully." The words struck me with a clarity that left no room for denial. I thought of Lowell on his way, of Dorian waiting at the altar, of Clara standing here offering me the kind of maternal steadiness I hadn't felt since my mother died. The ache in my chest didn't disappear, but it shifted, making space for something steadier to take root. Clara brushed a strand of hair from my face. "Don't let them steal this day from you." Her quiet conviction settled over me like armor, and as I nodded, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hall Lowell had arrived. Lowell entered with a gust of cool air, his gray hair damp at the temples from rushing. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug that smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. For a moment, I let myself sink into his arms, the steadiness of him reminding me of the ground beneath my feet. When he stepped back, his eyes searched mine. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly. "Not from Edric, not from Silas." I swallowed, afraid my voice might crack. "It's not even about today anymore." "Uncle, it feels like it's always been this way." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, pressing it into my hands. "Then let me give you something that was never tainted by them." Inside, nestled against black satin, lay a strand of pearls, their surface glowing softly in the light. My breath caught. "These are your grandmother's." He finished. "She wore them at her wedding. After she passed, I kept them safe, waiting for the right moment." I traced the curve of the pearls with trembling fingers. "I don't know if I should." "You should," he said firmly, "because they were meant for a woman strong enough to carry them. That's you." His gaze turned distant, and he lowered himself into the chair beside me. "You know, when I graduated college, my father didn't come." I looked up sharply. Why he wanted me to take over the family business. When I chose teaching instead, he said I'd embarrassed him. I sat there in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd for his face. It never came. He paused, voice roughening. "I've spent decades telling myself it didn't matter, but it did. Some wounds never quite close." The sadness in his eyes wasn't bitter, just honest. And somehow, that truth steadied me. He wasn't pretending strength. He was showing me how it could live alongside pain. I closed the box and clutched it to my chest. "Thank you for trusting me with them. I'll wear them proudly." Lowell reached over, resting his hand over mine. "Break the pattern. Marybelle, don't spend your life waiting for someone who won't show up." His words echoed in my chest, louder than the ache, louder than the silence my father had left behind. I straightened, lifted the pearls, and asked Jessica to help fasten them around my neck. The cool weight settled against my collarbone like a promise, and just as I drew in a steadier breath, the wedding planner reappeared at the door, reminding us it was time to practice the walk. The chapel was empty except for Lowell, the planner, and me. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as we took our places at the back, sunlight spilling through the stained glass and scattering across the pews. I tightened my grip on his arm, the silence pressing against my ribs. "Just breathe," Lowell murmured, steady as a metronome. We took our first step together, then another, following the measured pace the planner set. My gown whispered against the aisle runner, each sound reminding me that the man I had once imagined at my side would never make this walk. Halfway down, my throat closed. I could almost see the empty space where Dad should have been, feel the ghost of his absence heavier than the pearls resting on my collarbone. Lowell stopped gently, turning so I faced him. His expression softened, lined with patience. From his pocket, he pulled a folded handkerchief, edges worn with age, initials stitched neatly in blue thread. "L-M-H." I lifted my eyes to his. and he said quietly, "Your mother gave this to me before she passed. Linda Marie Harlow. She asked me to keep it until you might need it. I think today is that day." The fabric trembled between my fingers as I took it. The faint scent of lavender clung to it, carrying me back to nights when she'd sit at the edge of my bed, brushing my hair, telling me stories to soothe the dark. "I miss her so much," I whispered. "I know." His voice roughened. "But she's here. Maribel. In these pearls. In that handkerchief. In you." The ache inside me shifted into something steadier, rooted. I pressed the handkerchief to my chest, inhaling deeply. Then nodded. "Let's try again." We walked the full length of the aisle this time, my steps aligning with his, my hand firm on his arm. At the altar, I lifted my chin. The absence still throbbed, but it no longer owned me. As we turned to walk back, the planner smiled faintly, adjusting her clipboard. Outside the chapel, I could already hear the rising hum of guests arriving. The music began, low and steady, and the chapel doors swung open. A wash of sunlight spilled across the aisle, and every head turned. My heart pounded as I stepped forward on Uncle Lowell's arm, the pearls cool against my skin, the handkerchief tucked safely into my palm. Gasps rippled through the guests when they realized my father wasn't by my side. For a heartbeat, shame threatened to buckle my knees. But then I caught sight of Dorian at the altar, his eyes fixed only on me, his expression a mixture of awe and love. The ache inside me loosened, and I lifted my chin. Lowell's arm was solid, grounding. Each step we took felt less like loss and more like defiance. I wasn't abandoned, I was accompanied by the person who chose to show up. When we reached the altar, the officiant smiled warmly before speaking. Family is a word we often tie to blood, but today we are reminded that family is also chosen. It is shown by presence, by love, and by sacrifice. Her words spread through the garden like a blessing, and for the first time all day, I felt something close to peace. Lowell placed my hand gently in Dorian's, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "She's yours to cherish," he whispered. Though I knew he wasn't letting me go, he was standing beside me in another way. As Dorian's fingers closed around mine, I felt steady, complete. The hollow place carved by my father's absence no longer yawned wide. It was filled, not by pretense or excuses, but by the people who had chosen to stand with me. I turned toward Dorian, ready to speak my vows. Just as the faint creak of the chapel doors behind us announced another arrival, the reception was already alive with music and the clinking of glasses when I saw him, my father, hovering at the edge of the ballroom. His suit looked hastily pressed, his shoulders hunched as though he knew he was late not only in hours, but in years of promises. Conversations faltered as guests noticed him, but no one approached. I kept my back straight, refusing to let the old ache rise again. Before I could decide whether to acknowledge him, Rowan, my cousin, hurried over. His expression was tight, his phone gripped firmly in his hand. "Maribel, you need to see this," he said, glancing toward my father. He turned the screen toward me. Group chat messages lit up the display, Silas's words sharp and mocking. "Dad's waffling, but don't worry, I'll make sure he skips her big day. Drinks at Murphy's, same time as the ceremony. He'll choose me, like always." My breath caught as Rowan swiped to the next set of messages. Photos filled the screen, Silas surrounded by friends, cocktails raised, time-stamped squarely during the moment I'd been walking down the aisle with Lowell. Laughter, pride, celebration all at my expense. Rowan's voice hardened. "He moved the time 3 times to line up with every change in your wedding schedule. He planned it." The ballroom seemed to tilt. My father stood only a few feet away now, his face pale as he caught sight of the images himself. For once, there was no excuse, no weak smile or half-truth to hide behind. I pressed my hand against the pearls at my throat, steadying myself as a swell of anger, grief, and clarity converged. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see, and there was no going back. I turned slowly to face him, every eye in the room waiting for what I would say next. My father stepped closer, his mouth opening and closing before sound came. "Maribel," he said, voice breaking. I didn't know Silas had done this. If I had, I lifted my hand, cutting him off. "You would have what? Come this time kept your word just once." My voice was calm, too calm. "You've been making this same choice for years. Today only proved what I already knew." He flinched, the color draining from his face. "I want to apologize." He tried again, louder now as though the volume could erase the truth. "No." The word landed solidly, like a stone dropped in still water. "You made your choice. Now I make mine." The silence in the room stretched long and heavy. I turned away, leaving him in it, and crossed the dance floor where Uncle Lowell waited. When the music shifted, he stepped forward, offering his arm. I took it without hesitation. We moved together in time, his eyes glistening but proud. "You look radiant," he whispered. "For once," I replied. "I feel it." When the song ended, Dorian stepped in, his hand warm at my back, guiding me into his embrace. The ache I had carried all day eased as he leaned down and murmured, "You're not alone. Not anymore." I rested my head against his shoulder, letting the rhythm and his steadiness carry me. Beyond him, I caught a glimpse of my father standing at the periphery, shoulders hunched, smaller than I had ever seen him. But I no longer felt the familiar pull to bridge the gap. The strings that tied me to his approval had finally snapped, and the air around me felt freer than it ever had before. The band shifted into a brighter melody, and laughter rose around us, carrying me into the night. Autumn sunlight filtered through the windows of the Fletcher home, casting a warm glow over the table where our family gathered. The laughter of cousins and the clink of glasses filled the room, and Dorian's hand rested gently over the curve of my belly. I still wasn't used to the flutter of life inside me, but it felt like a promise I'd finally kept to myself. Lowell rose from his chair, his smile softer than usual, and handed me a wrapped bundle. I unfolded the tissue paper to reveal a cream-colored baby blanket, the stitches intricate and careful. "Alice made this years ago," he said, his voice thick. "She wanted it to be for the next generation. I think she'd be glad it's finally in the right hands." I traced the delicate pattern, the weight of his gift settling over me. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening, and reached to squeeze my shoulder. The doorbell rang, and a hush fell briefly. When it opened, my father stood there, a worn photo album clutched to his chest. He looked smaller than I remembered, his eyes searching for mine. "I brought something," he said, stepping in cautiously. "Photos of your mother, ones you've never seen." I hesitated, then gestured for him to join us. He opened the album to a picture of her smiling, pregnant with me, her hand resting over the same swell I now carried. His voice was quiet. "I can't change the past, Maribel, but I'd like to be here for your future, for her future." I didn't promise him forgiveness. I only took a slow breath and said, "One day at a time." The camera clicked as someone called for a family photo, and in that moment, I understood the kind of family worth keeping. The call came on a gray November afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my Portland office. My father's name flashed across the screen, and for a moment I allowed myself a small hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe, for once, he was reaching out with something other than a perfunctory update. "Celeste," he said, his voice clipped, businesslike. "About Thanksgiving." I waited, pen poised above the page. "Your mother and I have decided it would be best if you didn't come this year. He paused, only long enough for the weight of the words to settle. Marina is bringing Adrian, and we want things to go smoothly. He comes from a very respectable family, and we don't want complications. Complications. That was what I had become to them. Not a daughter. Not even an afterthought, just a potential embarrassment in a room they wanted polished for someone else. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I see. I managed. Good, he said, relief evident. We'll talk after the holidays. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, staring at the city skyline beyond my office window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the outlines of bridges and buildings. For years, I had known the truth that Marina was the chosen one, the one to be celebrated. Still, hearing the rejection stated so plainly reopened wounds I thought I had buried. I leaned back in my chair, forcing my breathing steady. I had built a life of substance, a company from nothing, yet in their eyes I was still less than my sister's +1. The old ache of invisibility pressed in, but beneath it, something else flickered a spark I hadn't felt in years, and with that spark, memories I had tried to leave behind began to stir. The memories came back as they always did quietly at first, then all at once, like a film I couldn't stop replaying. Eugene in the late 90s smelled of wet pine and wood smoke, but inside our house it was all about Marina. My sister's piano recitals drew a crowd of parents, teachers, and neighbors who clapped as though she were destined for Carnegie Hall. When she traded piano keys for tennis rackets, Dad drove her to lessons 3 times a week and cheered from the sidelines, rain or shine. I remember standing by the kitchen doorway, holding the program from my debate tournament, waiting for someone to ask how it went. They never did. Mom was fussing with Marina's costume, Dad reminding her to smile for the camera, and I learned that silence was easier than asking for space that was never offered. By the time Marina turned 16, there was a shiny silver Honda parked in the driveway with a bow on top. She'll need it to get to practice, Dad explained, his arm draped proudly around her shoulders. When I asked about a car for myself, he shook his head. You're resourceful, Celeste. You'll figure something out. And I did walking, biking, scraping together money for bus fare while working after-school shifts at the local diner. College was no different. The savings account my parents had built for Marina's tuition had been accumulating since she was born. When it came time for me, Dad's words were blunt. We always knew Marina would need more support. You've always been independent. Independence, their word for neglect, became the foundation of my life. Scholarships, loans, part-time jobs I pieced together what they wouldn't give. And though I carried resentment, I also carried a fire that no one else could claim credit for lighting. That fire smoldered through every sleepless night and every rejection, preparing me for the life I was determined to build far beyond Eugene. Oregon State was where I learned how far exhaustion could stretch a body. My days started before sunrise at the campus library, shelving books for minimum wage. Afternoons, I served coffee at a crowded cafe near downtown Corvallis. Evenings, I closed shifts at a diner off Monroe Avenue. In between, I crammed lectures, labs, and any spare moment I could steal to practice coding on a second-hand laptop that overheated if I pushed it too hard. Sleep became optional. Determination was mandatory. I told myself that if my parents couldn't or wouldn't invest in me, I would invest in myself until there was nothing left to give. 4 years blurred into one long grind, but I walked across that stage with honors, a degree in computer science and business administration clutched in my hands. After graduation, I moved north to Portland and found work at a small startup tucked into a converted warehouse. The pay was barely enough to cover rent in a crumbling studio, but the work was priceless. I stayed late after everyone left, teaching myself the systems they used until I understood them better than the managers who signed my paychecks. My weekends were spent sketching out ideas that no one asked for, chasing the notion that I could build something different, something sharper. Meanwhile, Marina floated. 1 month she was interning at a boutique fashion line in Los Angeles. The next, she was curating social media content for an influencer she claimed was about to blow up. She sent glossy photos from rooftop parties, her life lit in neon. While I coded through the night with takeout cartons piled at my desk, I stopped waiting for my parents to notice the difference. Their calls were filled with Marina's stories, her supposed adventures, while I bit my tongue and turned my silence into fuel. By the time I pitched my first product to investors, I was used to skepticism. They saw a young woman with no safety net and no last name that opened doors. But I knew how to push through doubt. I had been doing it my whole life, and I wasn't about to stop. Thanksgiving morning crept in under a sky the color of steel. From my Pearl District apartment, I could hear the faint echo of parade coverage drifting from a neighbor's television. I tried to ignore it, burying myself in work, but the notifications buzzing on my phone betrayed me. Marina's post appeared first, her arm looped possessively through Adrian's, the two of them flanked by my parents in front of the familiar oak dining table. My father's smile was wide. My mother's hand rested gently on Adrian's sleeve, and Marina's caption read, "So grateful for family and new beginnings." I stared at the photo longer than I should have, the ache pressing hard against my chest. 5 bedrooms in that old house. Yet somehow there had been no room for me. By noon, I gave up pretending the day would pass like any other. I heated soup from a can, sat at the counter, and told myself solitude was strength. But the walls felt closer than usual, the silence louder. The phone rang. Rowan's voice filled the line before I could greet him. "You're not spending the day alone. Celeste. Get over here. My mom has more food than we can eat, and she's been asking about you." I resisted, mumbling excuses about work, but Rowan cut me off. "No, bring a bottle of wine if you must, but get in the car. You've been family to me since freshman year, and that means you're family to them too." An hour later, I walked into the warmth of his parents' house in Northwest Portland. The scent of sage and roasted turkey wrapped around me. Rowan's nieces darted between adults carrying plates, and his father carved meat with the practiced ease of decades. A place was set for me without question, a glass filled before I asked. I laughed more than I expected. Listening to stories that weren't mine yet still made room for me. Rowan's mother pressed a second slice of pie into my hands, saying simply, "Eat. You belong here." That night, driving home past streets strung with holiday lights, I realized belonging wasn't about bloodlines. It was about doors that opened and chairs that stayed empty until you arrived. And as December approached, I buried myself once more in work, certain I would need that reminder soon. December blurred into long nights at the office, my team pushing to close out contracts that would shape the next year. When the signatures finally dried, we had secured deals with 2 major West Coast firms' partnerships that would take our platform from promising to indispensable. By January, I was flying between Portland and Seattle weekly, overseeing the opening of a second office with a view of Elliott Bay. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like momentum finally catching up with years of work. When Forbes named me one of their tech women to watch, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the glossy spread with a strange mix of disbelief and pride. My name mine printed in bold letters that no one could ignore. I decided, against better judgment, to call home. Maybe this time they would hear me. Mom answered, her voice warm but hurried. "Celeste, dear, it's late. Is everything all right? I wanted to share some news." I began carefully. Techvision just opened an office in Seattle, and Forbes featured me this month. That's nice," she interrupted, her tone already shifting. "You'll never guess Marina and Adrian are thinking about moving to Boston. Adrian's been offered a promotion at his firm. It would be such a step up for them, living back east among his family's circles." Can you imagine? I closed my eyes, my free hand tightening around the arm of the chair. "That's great for them," I said evenly. "Oh, it is," she gushed. "Everyone is so impressed with Adrian. His firm has the most prestigious clients. Marina will love it there." I listened as she wove a tapestry of borrowed prestige, Adrian's salary, Adrian's lineage, Adrian's promising career. My accomplishments vanished beneath the noise of someone else's borrowed shine. When the call ended, I sat in silence, the magazine still open on my lap. The world outside my family saw me, celebrated me, validated the years of sacrifice. Yet in the house where I had once begged for recognition, nothing had changed. Marina remained the star, even when the light was only reflected from someone else. I folded the magazine shut and set it aside. If their attention came only through Adrian's shadow, then I would stop seeking it. My worth wasn't theirs to acknowledge or erase. By February, contracts multiplied, new hires filled the Seattle office, and I worked later than ever. The ache of exclusion was still there, but so was a new clarity one that would matter even more the day Leona from HR knocked on my door carrying a folder with my sister's name on it. It was a wet February morning when Leona tapped on my office door, a folder tucked under her arm. She had that half smile she wore when something was amusing but also delicate. I gestured for her to come in, bracing myself for whatever curveball the day had decided to throw. "We've been narrowing down applications for the senior strategy role," she began, placing the folder on my desk. "I thought you might want to see this one yourself." I flipped open the file and froze. At the top, in bold letters, was my sister's name, Marina Hartwell. Her resume was polished, the formatting crisp, but the content was another matter. Executive consultant at a boutique firm that had long since folded. Lead strategist on campaigns I knew she had merely tagged along for. Skills listed as though she were fluent in languages of code she had never studied. It was the same Marina I had always known confidence first. Substance optional. I looked up at Leona, who raised an eyebrow. She applied through the general portal. I don't think she realized who sits in this office. Of course she hadn't. My public profile was sparse, the press releases often using my middle name, Victoria, for privacy. To Marina, TechVision was just another company hiring, another rung she could skip to reach the top. For a moment, old resentment flared. After all the years she had been lifted at my expense, here she was again, reaching for something I had built with no acknowledgement of what it cost me. I closed the folder gently, treat it like any other application. I said, if she doesn't meet the criteria, she doesn't move forward. Leona studied me carefully, as if measuring whether I meant it. All right, we'll handle it by the book. When she left, I sat staring at Marina's name on the resume, the edges of the paper still warm from my hands. The irony was almost too sharp banned from Thanksgiving because of her successful boyfriend, and now she was knocking unknowingly on my door for validation. And fate, it seemed, was about to hand us both a reckoning neither of us had asked for. The following afternoon, I took my seat at the far end of the conference table, introduced only as part of the leadership team observing interviews. From my vantage point, I watched Marina sweep into the room, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. She carried herself as if she already belonged, her smile bright and rehearsed. The panel began with the usual questions. Devin, our technical director, asked her to walk through a project where she had managed complex systems. Marina launched into a vague story about coordinating teams across multiple channels, never naming a single platform or process. When pressed about methodologies, she brushed it off with a laugh. I don't get lost in the weeds. My value is vision and connections. Details are for the technical staff. Sophie, our senior strategist, exchanged a glance with Devin, both of them unimpressed. Still, Marina pushed forward, dropping names of acquaintances she barely knew, sprinkling in buzzwords like confetti. Then Jasmine, head of HR, turned to me with the smooth professionalism I had asked of her. Before we close, our CEO would like to pose a few questions. I stood. The air in the room shifted as I walked toward the head of the table. Marina's eyes widened, recognition dawning slowly, then all at once. Her smile faltered. "Hello, Marina." I said evenly. It's been a while. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You're the CEO. I nodded, sliding her resume toward me. According to this, you served as an executive consultant at Blake & Co. until last year. But I spoke with one of their partners last month, and they recalled you as an assistant. Can you clarify color rose in her cheeks? Titles are flexible, she muttered, and you've listed proficiency in Python. I continued. Could you outline how you'd structure a basic API call? Her silence answered for her. I closed the folder. Thank you for your time. HR will follow up. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, the mask slipping as she hurried from the room. And I knew, as the door shut behind her, that the reckoning had only begun. I hadn't even had time to sit back at my desk when the door flew open. Marina stormed in, cheeks flushed, eyes sharp with anger. What the hell was that, she demanded, slamming her portfolio down on the table. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You planned this. I kept my voice steady. You applied for a senior position you weren't qualified for. What you experienced was a standard interview. Before she could reply, the receptionist buzzed my line. Your parents are here, she said, hesitant. They insist on speaking with you. Seconds later, Gregory and Elaine entered, their expressions grim. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. Family helps family. He declared, You're in a position to give your sister this job. Do it. I rose slowly, meeting his eyes. This company stands on merit, not favors. I won't undermine what I've built to protect Marina from consequences. Elaine tried to soften the blow. Celeste, think about what this could mean for her. She's been struggling. A chance here could turn things around. I'm not denying her a chance, I said. But it will be an entry-level role, where she can learn and prove herself like everyone else. Marina scoffed. Entry-level. After all I've done, you've always been jealous. Celeste, always trying to prove you're better. Something in me snapped. Jealous. My voice shook, but not from weakness. I worked 3 jobs to pay for school while you got a car at 16. I built this company without a dime of support, while you bounced from one failed venture to the next. And even now, after Forbes and 2 offices and contracts worth millions, all you see is someone who should shrink so you can shine. Silence filled the room. For once, no one interrupted me, and in that silence, I realized I had finally spoken aloud what I had carried in my chest since childhood. The fallout came quickly. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that Marina had been let go from her firm. Not long after, Adrian disappeared from her social media feeds, their carefully staged photos vanishing as if they had never existed. For the first time in her life, Marina was without both status and a safety net of borrowed prestige. 2 weeks later, my building's concierge called up to say my parents were in the lobby. I almost told him to turn them away. Instead, curiosity or maybe habit made me buzz them in. They looked smaller in my living room than I remembered. Gregory's shoulders slumped, Elaine's eyes scanning the walls as though searching for pieces of a daughter she had never bothered to know. Thank you for seeing us, my mother began, her voice tentative. We should have come sooner. Gregory cleared his throat. Marina's been having a hard time. We hoped well. We hoped you might consider helping her. The request hung in the air like smoke, but for once, they didn't press. Elaine surprised me by asking, quietly, how did you do it? Celeste build all this on your own? I told them pieces late nights. Endless rejections. The stubborn belief that no one could take away what I built with my own hands. And as I spoke, I saw something shift in her face. Not pride, not yet, but recognition. It didn't erase the years of silence or favoritism, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever received. When they left, the apartment felt strangely quiet, as if their presence had unsettled something I'd kept locked away. And soon enough, Marina herself would come knocking. Spring turned into summer before I saw Marina again. She came to the office dressed simply, Her resume pared down to the truth. Gone were the inflated titles and grand claims. She applied for an entry-level marketing coordinator position, and this time she made no requests for special treatment. When the offer came, she accepted without hesitation. On her first day, she stopped by my office, standing in the doorway like someone unsure of her welcome. "I want to do this right," she said quietly. "I'll start at the bottom if that's what it takes." I nodded, not offering forgiveness, but something steadier opportunity. Months later, an invitation arrived in the mail. My parents were celebrating their 40th anniversary. There was no caveat, no carefully worded exclusion, just a simple request. "Please join us." I went, not out of longing, but curiosity. The dining room looked the same as it had when I was a child, the oak table, the crystal glasses. But something was different. A seat had been set for me without hesitation, as though it had always been mine. Conversation stumbled at times, old habits lingering. But when Marina asked me about work, it wasn't with envy, it was with interest. As we raised our glasses to toast, I realized I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. What I wanted, what I had built, was respect, and that was finally beginning to take shape. Family, I thought, isn't about the ones who keep you waiting in the shadows. It's about the ones who make room when you walk through the door. And that night, for the first time in years, I sat at the table as myself,